Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Gooey's Dungeon Dive, the podcast where I, Gooey, rank every dungeon in The Legend of Zelda. We have a smaller episode this week as we take a look at the Ice Cavern. While not a proper dungeon, the Ice Cavern may be the first mini-dungeon in the series. Depends on what you're counting from previous games, but it ties in very closely with the overall quest involving the next main dungeon, the Water Temple. So I thought I'd include it and talk about it because why not? After helping our childhood friends and our sworn Goron brothers, it's time to check in with our future in-laws over at Zora's Domain. Unfortunately for them, some sort of curse coming from the Water Temple has caused all of Zora's Domain to be frozen over. And by delving into the Ice Cavern, we are able to obtain some key items for exploring the Water Temple. There's the iron boots that cause us to sink in the water, and as well as some mysterious blue fire, which melts this weird special red ice. And using that, we're going to be able to free King Zora, who will give us the blue tunic, allowing us to breathe underwater. The Ice Cavern is exactly what it sounds like. It's a snowy, icy cavern with slippery floors, icicles dropping from the ceiling to hurt us, and plenty of ice-based enemies ready to freeze us. Of course, the soundtrack in this game, it's great. It kind of ties the whole aesthetic together like usual. It's a very simplistic but atmospheric kind of like chimey instrumental. Definitely makes you, like, when I hear it, I picture like ice crystals and stuff like that. So, being a mini dungeon, this is definitely one of the most, if not the most simplistic dungeon in the series. I don't know, there's other ones like, we didn't really count Candlelit Castle, but if you wanted to think of that as a mini dungeon, that would also be extremely simplistic. But this dungeon does have a little bit of elements of progression, at least. And there's a couple pretty neat puzzles here too. There's, very notably, an ice block pushing puzzle, which is always fun. Navigationally, though, from the entrance, there's really only one route we can take initially that leads to a room with the blue fire and the map. From there, we actually, there's like backtracking, and you go back to kind of this central room, sort of, that has the spinning blade puzzle. And from there, there's two routes that were blocked by that red ice. And with the blue fire obtained in the previous room, we can backtrack here and progress. One's a totally optional room with a bunch of nice goodies like gold sculptula, the compass, heart container. Pretty neat. But the other way is the path that leads to the aforementioned iron boots. Disappointingly, they're only guarded by a white wolfos, so I don't really know how to feel about that as a boss fight necessarily, but it could have been cooler, but the room is at least pretty sick looking. So, completing the cavern, it allows us to learn the warping song of the Serenade of Water from this mysterious Sheik character. And all of this really kind of ups the ante of what leads up to a dungeon. We have some minor quest stuff before, but now we have almost a mini dungeon leading into the dungeon. So I think it's kind of neat. I felt kind of good including this because there are some elements of like progression and puzzles and a map and a compass compared to like I didn't include like in the Windfish's egg because that would have just gone at the bottom, or like Candlelit Castle because I don't know, it felt more like an area, like a little bonus area or something. I wouldn't really describe that as a dungeon, though if you wanted to and put on your list, that's fine, but it wouldn't rank very high for me. I think Candlelit Castle honestly compares more to like the Gerudo Valley, like their fortress, and finding the captured carpenters later in the game. I don't really think of that as like a dungeon itself either, if that makes any sense. What really was the deciding factor was I kind of thought, I don't think I would put this last on the list. I think it's actually surprisingly pretty nice and fun, so let's take a look at the list and see where it's going to go. So I've also been sort of hinting at this, but this is where I've wanted to reevaluate a part of my list. Not the whole thing, but I did say I might move a couple things around, and, you know, as time's gone on and some things have sunk in, I thought, okay, I have a different appreciation for certain dungeons. So, I'm going to just do right now an area where I'm thinking the Ice Cavern is probably going to land somewhere close to. And it's an area that I've sort of been thinking about, which is at the bottom of the list. Specifically, I was looking at these two dungeons down here, the Lion and the Demon. Some of the last dungeons in The Legend of Zelda. And I think I kind of was a bit unfair to them. Though I think some of my criticisms, I think still stand with some elements I think I criticize this for. I still feel strongly about, but I do feel that there are also very cool elements of this that I went unnoticed, particularly in the Demon. I remember being hardest about these with the bombing, and then also lack of like new enemies and stuff like that, and maybe underwhelming progression, though I don't know if that necessarily applies as much. And I've come to realize that I actually do like these two more than these more gauntlet dungeons in level 2, the Moon, and level 6, the Dragon. So I wanted to at least start by bumping them up. Now, not only that, but I started to feel like that I could kind of appreciate them more than at least Parappa Palace, which is a fine dungeon, but it is pretty simplistic. It does have a more kind of set progression, but it's still a little basic. And I thought, I really, especially with the Demon in some of its more unique elements, thought that it could be stronger than that. Medoro Palace, that has a cool thing with like breaking the blocks, but I even thought, okay, we can go above that. But I'd stop maybe at Island Palace, because that has some pretty unique stuff in it that I think is worth getting a shout out. These may seem like big moves, but in all honesty, these were all pretty close. You know how I liked the Adventure of Link dungeons kind of building upon each other pretty gradually, so this is definitely not a diss on them. Now, on top of that, I just wanted to boost up the Demon, because I was looking at these and I really griped about the bombing, but actually kind of gave it a second look, and my mind has sort of changed on that. I know for a lot of modern and new players, it's kind of an issue, but I've come to appreciate it more, and I also think if you are being careful and maybe mapping your way around, there's actually really only a few places you can actually bomb. And especially in the Demon, I really like the puzzle involving, you know, bombing in the creature's nose or whatever it was. So while it kind of, like, I really think Aquamentus as the boss is kind of lame, I think, you know, I think I can justify moving the Demon up above Island Palace and the Lion. I hope everyone's following so far and this isn't upsetting anyone. But something tells me the NES dungeon movements aren't gonna bother too many people. But I have one final move that I'd like to do, and that's, I've come to, while I like Parappa Palace, I think it's fun, and I really was into the progression element of it. I think there is something, it's very simplistic, obviously, and I think there is something to the Dragon and the Moon, and just really Legend of Zelda overall as a gameplay experience, that makes me think, okay, maybe it's more appropriate to move this guy down to the bottom. Not really saying anything bad against the game, but that's just sort of how it sat with me a little bit more. And that being said, I think Adventure of Link still squeezes in here pretty nicely, so don't get me wrong. Oh, also, I guess I just realized that with Legend of Zelda, I've got to have my second dungeon bias shown off again, but not with Adventure of Link, so that's good. So just some shifting around there with the bottom ones. I feel pretty good about this looking at it now. Maybe I'll change my mind again, but I feel good about the ones I chose as my favorites in this game. Legend of Zelda, I think, kind of an inconsistent game with the dungeon progression compared to the other games, but what can you do? This now sets up kind of the perfect placement area for the Ice Cavern. Again, it's a fine mini dungeon. It's awesome in this game. I really love it. But it is lacking in a full experience. But I will say it's got more interesting puzzles than some of the Legend of Zelda and Adventure of Link ones. But it just is lacking in some of the key features. So my immediate go-to area, thinking about it, is somewhere around Medoro Palace, because it does basically have kind of a similar progression, though Medoro is got a little bit more complexity. I think Ice Cavern beats it out on pure aesthetic and maybe some more puzzle usage, and I think it's just kind of got a cool story, feature to it that is very fun. But it doesn't go up against the thing that also helped me bump up the line was thinking of it as kind of it's a pretty difficult challenge right before going into the final boss. So it kind of felt like a nice penultimate test. And I think this has not been as hard to place as it was to kind of move this stuff around, but I'm going to place it right below the lion, right above Medoro Palace. Again, this is not a bad thing necessarily. It's just, it is what it is. It's pretty basic. The fact that I put it here too, it does say that it does pretty well for what it is. Something like the Windfish Egg, that was just basically one puzzle and a boss, although a more satisfying boss than here. But it doesn't really feel like a dungeon, where this, it really does. And maybe it is just, it helps that they just give you a map and a compass, even though you don't really need it. Makes me think that you could expand upon this and make a whole dungeon out of it. And I guess they do eventually make a 3D ice dungeon, so maybe this walked so the other dungeons could fly or run. I don't know. Anyway, solid placement here at the bottom. Hope this is okay with you guys that I move stuff around. Let me know if this is an outrage, and I'll reverse it. But overall, I really like this ranking more now. My tastes have evolved. Let's just say, some of these decisions I make as I'm recording, and then when I'm editing, I kind of think, no, actually this should go here. And then by the time it comes out and I've talked to some of the viewers or Corey, I'm like, oh, that's a good point. Actually, shout out to Corey for talking up the lion so much. But let me know what you think of this. And now we're finally going to the water temple. So see you then.